Get to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up for you in the next 60 minutes, Scotland's favourite historian, mine too, Neil Oliver, gives me his take on why England has become the first country in the world to ditch all COVID restrictions, or at least that's the plan. Also, the former Donald Trump advisor, Sebastian Gorka, joins me with some advice to the British government about fracking. And yes, Prime Minister, is John Major really the right man to be giving Boris Johnson lectures about probity in public life? Expecting to hear from the Prime Minister, by the way, from Warsaw Live in the next hour or so. And throughout, alongside me in today's show, the political commentator Alice Grant, who will be throwing in her two-penneth throughout the course of the next 2 hours. But first, the headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Your top stories this hour. The Prime Minister says Poland and the UK won't accept a world in which a powerful country can bully or attack its neighbours. It comes amid continuing fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Speaking after meeting the Polish Prime Minister, Boris Johnson said Poland is critical to security in Eastern Europe, adding when Poland is threatened, we're all threatened.
Earlier today, the UK's 45 Commando unit touched down in Poland, and those 350 troops join the 150 British troops who arrived here in December in response to instability on the Belarusian border, and they're standing shoulder to shoulder with our Polish counterparts to bring stability and security not just to Poland but to Europe and, indeed, I would say to the world.
Boris Johnson speaking in Poland. Well, meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary has challenged her Russian counterpart, who claims the Kremlin isn't threatening any country, despite its build-up of troops near Ukraine's border. Liz Truss said, though, she can't see any other reason for having 100,000 troops stationed on the border. But the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, accused Britain of refusing to listen. Here, the Prime Minister says he won't quit if he's fined by police over alleged lockdown-breaking events at Number 10. The former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, has accused Boris Johnson of breaking the law and making the government look distinctly shifty, in his words. Responding to the criticism, Boris Johnson said it was demonstrably untrue that controversies about parties in Downing Street had damaged the UK's reputation abroad. Sir John says Mr Johnson's brazen excuses are undermining public trust in government.
Our democracy is a fragile structure. It is not an impenetrable fortress. It can fall if no one challenges what is wrong or does not fight for what is right. The protection of democracy depends upon Parliament and the government upholding the values we have as individuals and the trust we inspire as a nation.
Sir John Major. In Scotland, pupils and teachers in secondary schools will no longer need to wear face coverings in classrooms. That's from the end of February. Masks will still be required, though, in communal areas and when moving around school buildings. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced the change earlier in the Scottish Parliament.
In arriving at its recommendation, the advisory subgroup pointed to reducing case rates for secondary-aged pupils, which is a recent development, falling hospitalisation rates across all age categories, and the fact that at this stage the estimated R rate is now below 1. In addition, of course, vaccination rates for young people continue to increase.
Nicola Sturgeon. Pig farmers have been protesting outside a meeting that they say is crucial for the future of their industry. A roundtable discussion is taking place at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, in York, over a crisis in British pig production. It's after at least 35,000 healthy pigs had to be culled because of a shortage of butchers. The National Pig Association says more than 200,000 other pigs are being held on farms, even though they're ready for processing. Prince William has told children in Abu Dhabi they are the future in the fight against climate change. The Prince has been planting mangrove trees with the children. The future king also met the son of the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Khaled, to discuss protecting the country's wetlands. Meanwhile, Prince William's father, Prince Charles, has tested positive for COVID-19 for the second time. The Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall attended an event at the British Museum yesterday. A palace source says Prince Charles met with the Queen recently, but the monarch is not showing any symptoms. The Welsh First Minister, Mark Drakeford, has also tested positive today. You're with GB News, more news as it happens. Now, more from Colin Brazier.
Hi there and a very good afternoon to you. Got a really packed show for you today. We start with this one. England is on course to be the first country in the world to ditch all COVID restrictions, as Boris Johnson made clear yesterday. That does depend on the continuation of infection trends, which are currently really quite promising. But before we put up the bunting, let's consider a few things. Firstly, many people think that the end of this month is too soon to ditch rules on self-isolation. Half of all the 4,500 Britons interviewed for a YouGov poll published today think we should retain quarantine rules forever. Then there are the unions. Unison, it represents more than 1 million workers in the public sector whose salaries are paid for by taxpayers, attacked the PM's plan. They insisted that the pandemic had not disappeared. And then there's Scotland. The First Minister is reluctant, it seems, to follow at least some of England's relaxations, and there are voices you might expect to stay out of the fray of politics who've been very much weighing in today. Professor Devi Sridhar from Edinburgh University, for instance, said that yesterday's announcement in London was to, quote, create headlines, and she went on to say it was also to, quote, distract from the problems the PM is facing, which is that he seems to have broken lockdown rules. You may feel that's getting into politics for an epidemiologist. You may not, I don't know. We're joined from Stirling by GB News presenter Neil Oliver. Neil, very good afternoon to you. Thanks for your time as ever. Should we start with that YouGov poll? I don't know about you, but I'm stunned to the point of disbelief that half of those polled, and it wasn't a small sample, 4,500 people, half of them said they'd like the rules on quarantine, self-isolating for up to 10 days. Obviously, that depends on how you do with the test. But some type of quarantine system based on testing to remain in place, in quotes, forever. My goodness.
I struggle also to take that in. I can only imagine that it's a product of the atmosphere that has prevailed for the last 2 years. You know, people were encouraged, driven really, to be terrified of COVID and everything to do with the pandemic. You know, the mask wearing, the social distancing, all of those behaviours that in a relatively, you might have said, a short period of time have become absolutely embedded in the behaviour of so many people that they turn to them instinctively and feeling the need to be protected from the outside world and from strangers and all the rest of it. I don't think it's any surprise, but it's very, very worrying, you know, looking into the future, if this is to be the attitude of maybe, well, let's say half of the population based on that survey. I find myself at the other extreme. I consider that the emergency is over, the pandemic is over. I know many people would challenge my amateur assessment of the situation, but I just want to get back to normal. And so for one, I celebrate the fact that the Westminster government is saying that it's going to take the line, that it will, but we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens, but we know, don't we, Neil, there's permanent scarring that's been left by this. I don't just mean in things like the oncology backlog, but I mean even in terms of the way we relate to each other as human beings.
Yes, absolutely. There's been something profound has happened. Something fundamental has happened. I would never have believed that it could be achieved in such a short space of time, but there you go, it has. And I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say that for many people, the behaviours associated with COVID, with the pandemic, have become religious. I think for many people, the routines, the wearing of face masks, and the following of all the rules, and being seen to be either part of the good crowd or part of the bad crowd, listening to the words from the priesthood, being the scientists, the good scientists, protecting the church, which is the NHS. And within a 2-year period, I think it has ingrained itself very deeply in people. But there you go. It's been like a mass social experiment, and now we're seeing the results. I mean, when it comes to Scotland and Nicola Sturgeon taking a different path, well, she always has. She has always, in her desperation to be seen to be different from Westminster, different from Boris Johnson, she's always taken her own path and varied what Scotland was going to do relative to what England was going to do. And so we find ourselves in this situation. I find it's almost existential. I wonder at the extent to which Great Britain is a united kingdom anymore. Who is flying this plane? If the Prime Minister in Westminster says one thing, but national leaders in Scotland and indeed in Wales can say something else entirely. I do wonder at the extent to which, in amongst everything else, are we a united kingdom or not?
And Neil, just on the point about the priesthood, that's the word you used, of some scientists. I mean, I was shocked today to see people like Devi Sridhar, very eminent, globally eminent scientists, advisor to the Scottish government on COVID, coming out and saying, making a political statement really, and saying, what Boris Johnson has announced in terms of getting to the lifting of restrictions on COVID is something to displace and deflect criticism from him politically. That is a political judgment. I know the Chief Medical Officer has retweeted something which has upset Tories in Scotland as well. I mean, it's one thing for scientists to offer us guidance on, our elected officials' guidance on decisions that they then subsequently take. It's another thing, it seems to me, for those unelected scientists to be actually wading into politics.
Well, I would agree with that completely. I've been amazed by many of that particular scientist's pronouncements. She has taken a political line, and she has been, it would appear she has sought to align herself politically with the Scottish government and to stand in opposition to the position coming out of Westminster. I've been amazed by Devi Sridhar's stance all along, but she's only one amongst several. But I do think, though, it is indicative, as I was saying, of that idea that this has moved beyond something medical and something scientific into something that feels much more like a religion. And if it's not a religion, then it's a case of people being invited to say whether they belong to the good people or the bad people, the clean or the unclean. I think it has got very deep in terms of the way in which it has ingrained itself in the way we think about each other, the way we relate to each other. The masking, I have found that very difficult from the beginning, regardless of the justifications or not for masks. I've found only looking at people's eyes on the street very difficult, because I realised how used I was to gauging people's attitude and mood and how they were relating to me based on reading their expressions, and being denied that. I have felt that a profound distance has grown between me and my fellow citizens because I don't feel I can hear them or communicate with them properly. And I've found the whole thing very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well,
the other thing about Scotland that troubles me is the fact that Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon and her government have voted to, or have decided to retain the emergency powers. That is existential as well. The very fact that they were released because of an emergency, and England and Westminster seems to be saying or suggesting that the emergency is over, and yet in Scotland the emergency powers will be retained, which I think is indicative of something that's across Europe, across the world. Jacinda Ardern, Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, all sorts of world leaders, national leaders have grabbed at power, and having got power, I mean, as many people have said, there's nothing so permanent as temporary government measures. And if those controls on our lives can be retained even after the emergency might be said to be passed, then I do wonder if those restrictions will ever be taken away.
Well, Neil, those masks may inhibit communication, but you continue to communicate very, very clearly and forcefully and lyrically, if you don't mind me saying. Neil, thanks very much indeed. Neil Oliver joining us from Stirling there.
Thanks, Colin.
Well, that's Neil's very personal perspective on things. Alice Grant is with me in the studio for the next hour or so. You were nodding vigorously at times during Neil Oliver's soliloquy there. Why?
Yes, I thought a lot of what Neil said was very pertinent, and especially the fact that COVID restrictions and the whole hysteria around COVID has indeed become very political. And of course, because here we're talking about our liberty and also the future of the economy and our society as a whole. So naturally, there are some political lines that are being drawn.
People are entitled, Alice, aren't they, just to look at what Boris Johnson said at PMQs yesterday and point out the fact that there are some members of SAGE who feel not all the data's in yet. Perhaps it was a little bit premature. I know the Prime Minister's saying the end of the month and it's dependent on the data. But there are people, respectable scientists, saying, actually, Prime Minister, this feels like opportunism.
Well, there are many scientists on the other side as well who are saying that actually most of the SAGE models have been far, far over-exaggerated and over-dramatised, and the outcomes which we've been relying on for the past 2 years have been worst-case scenarios, almost none of which have actually turned out to materialise.
Great.
So, to be honest, I'm very happy to hear that the Prime Minister is going to lift restrictions. I think it's it's a long time coming.
We're going to look at some of those worst-case scenarios and some of the modelling and the defects of the modelling with Jamie Jenkins, indeed, statistician, a little later on. Stay tuned for that. Alice, for now, thanks very much indeed. Back to you soon. We're going to move on to this story, and that is that 2 of Britain's only viable shale gas wells are to be filled with concrete, in spite, that is, of appeals that they be used to help plug the UK's yawning energy gap. More than 2 years ago, the government ordered a moratorium on fracking at the Preston New Road site in Lancashire. Boris Johnson said to be resisting calls for the resumption of work there. Worse still, for those who believe fracking can create tens of thousands of British jobs and produce cheaper energy, the industry regulator has now said that the wells must be permanently sealed up. Well, the former White House strategist to President Trump, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, joins me now. I'm delighted to say. Seb Gorka, thanks for your time. What do you make of this decision?
Sheer insanity. It's still the cheapest form of energy. When we came into the White House, President Trump unleashed fracking on all the state lands that Obama had blocked. And for the first time, think of this, Colin, for the first time in the history of our republic, we became a net exporter of energy. We didn't have to rely on some cartel in the Middle East like OPEC. We didn't have to grovel to that KGB colonel in the Putin to buy in the Kremlin to get cheap gas from Russia. And as a result, those regimes were weakened, bad guys were desperate, and we became stronger. So the idea that the UK, I hear about these new increases on heating for the average Brit. It's sheer, utter insanity. It is the worshipping of Mother Gaia. It is environmentalism as a religion.
And what do you say, Seb, however, to those people who hear what you're saying? They hate the fact that their energy bills are going up by £600, £700 in the UK. They hate the fact that effectively those bills then go to cross-subsidise despotic regimes, be that in Russia or be that in the Middle East. But they also are worried when they read headlines about things like earthquakes.
It's just a Cassandra-like hysteria. Look at the facts of the matter. If you want cheap, safe energy, you go with what? You go with nuclear. That's the logic. You go with the natural resources that are available to you. You don't go with the doomsday cult of the world is going to end like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says here in America, or Greta Thunberg, the prophet of doom for Europe. No, it's a fact. I grew up in the UK under Maggie Thatcher. The boom of North Sea oil resulted in what? An economy that was the envy of the world. Now you are literally cutting off your nose to spite your face. You don't have to be afraid of Armageddon scenarios and earthquakes. Look what happened in the 1980s in the UK. That's the way ahead, and stop worshipping these false prophets.
Seb, I want you to labour this point because I don't think it can be really laboured enough. Just how revolutionary it was, the reshoring of jobs made possible by energy so cheap that suddenly you were able to open factories which had been mothballed for years. I just wonder if you can give our viewers that sense of how transformative this may be. By the way, not quickly. The wells I'm talking about here, even if you got them fired up tomorrow, the gas wouldn't really start flowing in earnest for another 10 years. But we're talking about something in the medium to long term that could be absolutely transformative.
Think about just the facts of what we did when we came in. President Trump, in a matter of just 3 years, okay, before he actually left office, created an American economy that was the largest economy the world had ever seen. Just some data points for you, Colin. We had U.S. factories bringing back their plants from places like Mexico. We had the lowest unemployment for women since the 1960s. We had the lowest unemployment for minority Americans, that's Black Hispanic Americans, since record keeping began. That's because we unleashed the energy. The energy is the blood. It is the life force of any economy. And the UK, as a historic manufacturing nation, needs that energy, not just to heat your homes, but to actually build things as well. These are the facts of the matter. And what happened? Think of the hostage to ideology that is the Biden regime. This senile old man comes into the White House. First day in office, he signs an executive presidential order to shut down the XL Keystone pipeline from Canada, which lost 10,000 jobs in one day in America and 30,000 in Canada. Both sides of the aisle in Canada, the Conservatives and the Labour, didn't understand what this man was doing. But he was paying obeisance. He was kneeling at the altar of Greta Thunberg and the environmentalists. If you want to have a roaring economy like the one I grew up in under Thatcher in the UK, unleash the fracking, unleash the natural energy. We are meant to be stewards of this planet, and we should be using that energy for our own citizens.
Sebastian Gorka, as ever, very, very thought-provoking indeed. Seb, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Cheers.
Alice Grant is alongside me there. I'll just pick up one point that Sebastian Gorka made there with great eloquence as ever. I mean, the 1980s, I remember them, you don't live through them. Yes, the Thatcher boom that he talks about was good for parts of the country. For many parts of the country, it wasn't. But actually, a lot of those parts of the country that suffered, things like the coal mines closing, the shipyards closing, heavy industry closing, they are precisely the parts of the Rust Belt in America that Seb Gorka is talking about being revitalised by cheap shale gas.
Yes, indeed. If you look at Texas and Pennsylvania, these states which were withering away and now had seen this gold rush of an industry. And I look at the north of England right now. Obviously, we must really start pouring in some effort into making north of Britain flourish again. And something interesting I felt was that he mentioned Vladimir Putin, who of course was pouring in money campaigns against fracking and against gas shales. And yeah, he was funding the campaigns, the misinformation campaigns, and of course our gas supply is controlled entirely by Russia, which leaves us obviously in a vulnerable situation.
Our gas supply is not completely controlled. I mean, they have a controlling hand to some degree.
But only recently they shut off, our lights went out and there was nothing we could do. The point is we must take advantage, I think, of this industry, and of course, and we have gas-rich rocks in the north of England. I mean, what are we doing? It's self-sabotage if we don't.
We'll talk about that some more a little later on. Alice, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, we've got an exclusive interview from an activist from Hong Kong who fears returning to China under the communists and is fighting to stay in the UK. First, though, it's time for the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Showers ease overnight with clearing skies as well, and that will lead to a widespread frost up and down the country, with the exception of the east coast, and that's because of the low pressure that has brought some very windy weather to parts of Scotland through the day. That's going to transfer its winds and some showers to the east coast of England, southeast Scotland through the evening and overnight. Risk of gales in some exposed coastal locations, for example, the north coast of Norfolk. But away from there, clearing skies, 1 or 2 showers still affecting western parts, but otherwise under the clear skies with lighter winds away from the east coast, temperatures falling away. I think widely 0 to -3 first thing Friday, but for rural parts of Scotland, -5 to even as low as -10 Celsius is possible. However, despite the chill in the air first thing, plenty of sunshine about. Widespread sunny skies remain across central and eastern parts into the afternoon, whilst much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest turn increasingly cloudy. 1 or 2 showers here and there, but for the vast majority it stays dry, and temperatures 7 to 9 Celsius fairly widely. Into the evening, the thicker cloud towards the far northwest pushes some rain in and the winds pick up as well. So turning wet for Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, hill snow for a time for Scotland as well as the Pennines. And then the wet weather pushes into northwest England and West Wales by the end of the night. It turns more showery for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but with the wind picking up and the cloud increasing, most places are frost-free. The one exception, parts of East Anglia where temperatures will dip to around 0 first thing Saturday. Nevertheless, cloudy and increasingly breezy for the vast majority on Saturday itself. An area of persistent rain for southern Scotland, northwest England and much of Wales. Showers to the northwest of that, brighter skies to the south, and then widely wet and windy on Sunday.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
27 minutes past the hour of 4. Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV and on DAB radio. A teenager who says he was tortured by police in Hong Kong is calling on the British government to allow him to stay in Britain. Ivan Yim was arrested after taking part in the pro-democracy protests and fled to the UK in 2020. Last year, the British government started a special visa scheme to help people from Hong Kong flee from the Communist Party in China's crackdown on democracy. But those under the age of 25 are not eligible. But that could change from today.
After I've been arrived to the police station, I cannot see my lawyer. And when the interrogation is going on, they put a towel on my hair and put the water on the towel, and I cannot breathe. And the only thing to support me to do not say anything is I know that if I say anything, this maybe will use as evidence to persecute me. I don't want my next 10 years will be like this. Some of my friends told me I can come to UK and then in the morning, and then I just buy a ticket to this night and then leave, because I have no choice.
Well, Alice joins us from the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office. You saw in that interview there the reverse shot as well. Alice, welcome to you. Look, I mean, setting aside, if we can, the points of principle on this one and the extent to which people who suffer under the yoke of the Chinese Communist Party ought to be allowed to lead free lives in other parts of the world, particularly parts of the world which owe them an historical obligation, like I think many people would argue we do to Hong Kongers. These are often talented, educated, energetic people, precisely the people that UK PLC needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the government has worked out the value that these Hong Kongers will bring it to this country is almost $3 billion in net terms. I mean, that just gives you an indication there. But it's more than, as you say, just about the numbers in terms of what it brings financially, although I think it is worth mentioning that many Hong Kongers will benefit society here. But really, the fundamental issue is that there are, because of Hong Kong being a British colony before, there are 2.9 million people there who have this BNO status, this British national overseas status that they were able to get before Hong Kong was handed back to China in 1997. But the issue is those people can come to the UK, and up to 89,000 people have come to the UK over the last year or so. And in fact, Hong Kongers are the fastest growing community in the UK. But the issue is if you're born after 1997, you can't come to the UK independently, and that affects people like Ivan, and that's why it's a problem.
Alice, thanks very much indeed for now. Alice Porter there. Let's turn to Alice Grant, who's alongside me in the studio. These are young people, Alice. They've fought for freedom, many of them. Many of them live in fear of persecution.
Yes, I think this is a matter of justice, and obviously we must stand up to the evils perpetrated by the Chinese Communist Party government. And especially just seeing his plight was very moving, really. And I think it is our duty, I think, to do everything we can.
Duty?
For these people. Yes, absolutely. A British sense of duty, I think, is an important value for our nation. So
yeah, amen to that. Coming up after the break, the high-flying co-op boss taking time out to help her children with their exams. We'll have a debate about that. Put simply, should women put kids before careers? That's a slightly blunt way of putting it, isn't it? But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Your top stories this hour. The Prime Minister says Poland and the UK won't accept a world in which a powerful country can bully or attack its neighbours. That comes amid continuing fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Speaking after meeting the Polish Prime Minister, Boris Johnson said the country's absolutely critical to security in the region. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary has challenged her Russian counterpart, who says Moscow isn't threatening any country with its build-up of troops near Ukraine's border. Liz Truss said she can't see any other reason for having 100,000 troops stationed on the border. But the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Britain is refusing to listen. Here, Boris Johnson said it was demonstrably untrue that Partygate had damaged the UK's reputation overseas. It follows criticism from the former Prime Minister Sir John Major. He accused Boris Johnson of breaking the law and making the government look distinctly shifty. Sir John says Mr Johnson's brazen excuses are undermining public trust in government. Pupils and teachers in secondary schools in Scotland will no longer need to wear face coverings in classrooms from the end of the month. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced the change at the start of First Minister's questions in the Scottish Parliament. Prince William has told children in Abu Dhabi they are the future in the fight against climate change. The Prince has been planting carbon-capturing mangrove trees while he's been in the country. The future king also met the son of the Crown Prince, Sheikh Khaled, to discuss protecting Abu Dhabi's wetlands. Those are your headlines on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News. We'll have more from Brazier after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV and on DAB Radio. Would you take time off work to help your children with their exams? Today we learned that the boss of the Co-op's food division is doing precisely that. She's called Jo Whitfield and she's stepping away from the business to help her two sons. One is doing A-levels this summer, the other GCSEs. Well, not everyone can afford to do this. One of my sisters works on the tills of her local co-op and certainly couldn't make ends meet by going on unpaid leave. Jo Whitfield can, but then she took home £1.4 million in 2020. So while we can admire perhaps the maternal instincts of a woman who wants to help her kids revise, we might reflect on how not everyone has that luxury. So for today's debate, I'm asking, it's rather bluntly put, but it fits on the caption strap, should women put kids before careers? Joining me for the debate, the editor of the About Time magazine, Angelica Malin, and still with me, the political commentator, Alice Grant. Thanks both. Angelica, we'll start with you. We were just talking, Alice and I, during the commercial break about this, and people talk about career breaks with kids, don't they, for child rearing? And it tends to apply at that part of your life when the kids are little. They're in a cradle, or they're in nappies, or they're in a buggy. But actually, there's a way of looking at what this woman is doing that says, actually, yeah, OK, it's still a career break to raise her kids, but just a little bit later than normally is the case.
Well, I think that's what's made it newsworthy, that she is taking this break later on. Like you said, it's not at the kind of start of the career when you've just had babies. So that's what's unusual about it. I would say in this instance, it's less of a career break in that she's already really high flying and she's kind of made it already. So taking a break at this time is probably less important than when you're early on in your career. And that's when we see the struggle of women getting back into work when they've taken quite significant time off earlier in their careers.
Also, Alice, she's not going off to, find herself. She's not sailing around the Caribbean. She's knuckling down. She's for 4 months to help her two sons, one who's doing GCSEs this summer, the other doing A-levels. She's not taking it easy.
As someone who only completed my A-levels just 2 years ago, I still remember the amount of stress you're under as a young teenager, and to have my mother there as a support for me was of invaluable help. So I do think that it is very certainly important that you have your parents there to support you, especially when exams do take an enormous strain on mental health as well with young people. So I do think that she's obviously coming from a position of privilege here, But if just the question alone, careers over kids, it just sounds very wrong. I think children should always come first.
Angelica, the little spider sense tingles whenever I heard the word privilege, because I'm not sure that's the right word, Alice, if you don't mind me saying. I think she's part of an elite, but she's made that happen. I mean, I don't know the Joe Whitfield story, but you don't get to be the head of the food division at the Co-op and earn 1.4 million quid a year without working really hard. That's not privilege.
No doubt she's worked hard, but I think I would myself consider myself in a very privileged situation as well, just by the fact that I'm a university student.
It's semantics.
No, but I think the word privilege is something that can be used, obviously. I'm not undermining her hard work. I just think that
I don't know if it's privilege here, though. Privilege to me feels like something you're born into. Like you said, she's worked hard to get to this position. There's a difference between privilege and financial security. She's in a financially secure position to be able to do that. That's slightly different. There's a bit of a nuance within it. But I think it's also a slightly gendered issue. Like, the topic here is whether or not women should put career before kids.
Well, Angelica, there's a bit of the jigsaw that's missing from this story, isn't there? And I don't know. I don't know if there is a Mr. Whitfield or a Ms. Whitfield. I don't know what her arrangement is. I don't know if there is another partner. She may be a single parent. I've no idea.
Well, the thing is, anyway, the family is the bedrock of society, and we need strong families, especially nowadays when more than ever, I think children are growing up sometimes in fractured homes, which is causing enormous crises in mental health, and that is very plain to see even on the London streets. So.
Is that a women's issue, though? Isn't
absolutely.
But you think it's the burdens on the women for that? Because, I mean, I understand being a primary caregiver, but surely the responsibility is joint between men and women to make the family the bedrock. I think this is newsworthy because she's a woman and she's chosen to take a sideline on her career. That's what makes it interesting. But it's normal to take a sideline on your career as a woman. It's kind of expected.
The reason I like this story and was attracted to this story because it is abnormal. I think this is quite weird, quite a weird story. I think it's laudable in many respects. Here's a woman at the top of her game who, I mean, in the period of 4 months, it's unlikely she'll lose that much career momentum. Actually, she's pretty much got to the top of the tree anyway. But I think it's lovely that she's prepared to take 4 months out to help her kids at this crucial juncture. I've got a 16-year-old doing GCSEs. I've got a 17-year-old doing A-levels right now. Their late mother actually took a maths A-level 5 years ago, partly because her brain was turning to blancmange because we had so many children, she was at home, but partly because she wanted to help them with their exams. So there isn't just one way you can help your kids through their exams. There are different ways, and obviously this woman has got the ability to exercise the option.
Where's her husband in all of this is what I want to know.
Well, is she married?
Well,
I don't know. We don't know.
I don't think we should make assumptions on where the husband is. I think that's rather uncharitable. But I think the point here is that there are many women who can successfully balance both careers and being a wonderful mother figure.
I'm being told that she's
women
married.
Like Helena Morrissey, who has 9 children and is the top of the game in finance. So it is
and Richard
possible.
Morrissey, her husband, takes a lot of the responsibility.
Women should never feel that they have to sacrifice their motherhood or raising their children or being there for their children because they want a career. And I think such a sacrifice in itself anyway would be very unwise and lead to regrets in the long term because your children are ultimately your legacy that will last. So, of course, take care of them.
I don't know.
There's an eyebrow going up there, Angelica.
I think what inspires kids is seeing people work hard, and I don't think it has to be like such a compromise that it's one or the other. Like I had a strong working mother who was always at work, and it's made me work harder. I don't know that I would respect someone who was just like, I'm going to give up all my careers. I mean, I like to believe you can juggle it, but if you can't juggle it, I think that's also okay too.
Well, I come from the exact opposite situation, but I have to say that I think there is definitely, I think women shouldn't have to feel pressured from ardent and fervent feminists to have a career when in fact they want to be mothers. That's the thing, we're all different. Obviously your mother works a very different way from my mother, but the point is that there should be different options and none of those options we should feel attacked for choosing motherhood over career.
Somebody's feeding information into my ear, probably information I would have checked before we did this item actually, which is that there is a Mr. Whitfield and the Co-op boss describes him as vital in bringing up the kids. So I think there is a bit of sharing going on and possibly the lion's share of the domestic work is done by Mr. not Mrs. Whitfield in this instance. Can I just move this on a little bit? Here is a highly successful executive, done incredibly well with her career, who's taking time out of that career to help her 2 sons in their exams. There is a view, isn't there, that we're obsessed now by exams, we're too credentialed, we're too scholarised, we've created this meritocratic setup where if you fail those A-levels or fail those GCSEs, somehow you're knackered. So let's just entertain that idea. Here is somebody who's made a part of an elite, a woman who's done very well in her career, who has determined that actually the most important thing right now in her children's lives is that they get an extra push from her to pass some exams. The exams for her are clearly the be-all and end-all.
Well, I don't know. I don't assume her motives for helping her children, but I certainly do agree that there is far too much pressure on young people in terms of exams. I think that it's just got crazy, to be honest. The amount of pressure for 16, 15-year-olds that have for their GCSEs, being made to feel like these exams are whether you're going to be successful or not in life, I do think it's wrong. But obviously, pressure is just increasing as the demand that you go to university and get a degree is also increasing, sadly. But I do wish that children felt that there were more options available and that they didn't have to feel so pressured into achieving high grades, numbers and letters.
Angelica, what do you think?
Well, it's about the schooling system overall as well. I mean, perhaps there are factors. I think the exams matter because we put such a pressure on going to a high university, and it's all that beginning stages. I think I remember from the age of 13 feeling that pressure right through to when I went to university, of like feeling like there's this timeline of everything. I went to university and I messed around for 3 years, had fun, and I look back on it, I'm like, I didn't need that degree. I ended up working for myself and getting in quite a lot of student debt. So actually, I think you are right. We need to open up some conversations about different routes into work.
Well, we have them. We have them here frequently, and I think that we've got a minute or so left. And I'll just spend that minute if we can reflecting on what feels like a drift in society now that suggests that Joe Whitfield might have it slightly wrong. That actually A-levels in particular and going to university is not the be-all and end-all anymore. Alice, 2 years ago you did them.
Yes, certainly not. Obviously, I did my A-levels during the COVID pandemic, so I had to do my exams online, which did create some trouble and stress in itself. But ultimately, it also gave me the opportunity to also just spend time during lockdown as well, reflecting on other things. And I think I was able to grow a lot personally because of the lockdown, thankfully. But on the subject of different, I guess, paths for children, I think apprenticeships should be something that is very much promulgated more by the government, because they are a very good option into entering the world of work without having to go to university and waste time there, perhaps. So, yeah.
Well, I come back, Angela. I mentioned in the introduction, I mentioned one of my sisters who works, at the co-op in Bradford behind the till, and I think she does more for social cohesion by chatting to customers and being an absolute pillar of her community than any number of highly credentialed people who've got degrees. She does know the way the world works. She's a fantastic figure within that society locally. She earns bugger all, certainly a fraction of what Joe Whitfield, who we're talking about now. And I just wish we could reframe the debate. I mean, it's easy for me to say that, isn't it? I've been to university. I am quite highly credentialed. I'm earning a decent amount of lolly. Easy for me to say. And I'm certainly not saying to my kids, actually, your exams don't matter. But I wish I could.
And if we look in the boom in entrepreneurship, last year there was more companies registered in the UK than ever before. So more and more people are starting their own businesses as well and circumventing the need to have a degree. So there's lots of different things happening now.
I'm told that we were due to be joined by a doctor to talk about COVID. But wait, it's happening. We'll be going on to that. But first, we'll take the weather in just a second. Angelica, thanks so much for coming in. Really interesting topic of discussion. And Alex, I know you're going to be staying with us to reflect with less bitterness about those exams, I think. Thanks very much indeed. It's just time for the weather now.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGiven from the Met Office. Showers ease overnight with clearing skies as well, and that will lead to a widespread frost up and down the country, with the exception of the east coast, and that's because of the low pressure that has brought some very windy weather to parts of Scotland through the day. That's going to transfer its winds and some showers to the east coast of England, southeast Scotland through the evening and overnight. Risk of gales in some exposed coastal locations, for example, the north coast of Norfolk. But away from there, clearing skies, 1 or 2 showers still affecting western parts, but otherwise under the clear skies with lighter winds away from the east coast, temperatures falling away. I think widely 0 to -3 first thing Friday, but for rural parts of Scotland, -5 to even as low as -10 Celsius is possible. However, despite the chill in the air first thing, plenty of sunshine about. Widespread sunny skies remain across central and eastern parts into the afternoon, whilst much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest turn increasingly cloudy. 1 or 2 showers here and there, but for the vast majority it stays dry, and temperatures 7 to 9 Celsius fairly widely. Into the evening, the thicker cloud towards the far northwest pushes some rain in and the winds pick up as well. So turning wet for Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, hill snow for a time for Scotland as well as the Pennines. And then the wet weather pushes into northwest England and West Wales by the end of the night. It turns more showery for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but with the wind picking up and the cloud increasing, most places are frost-free. The one exception, parts of East Anglia where temperatures will dip to around 0 first thing Saturday. Nevertheless, cloudy and increasingly breezy for the vast majority on Saturday itself. An area of persistent rain for southern Scotland, northwest England and much of Wales. Showers to the northwest of that, brighter skies to the south, and then widely wet and windy on Sunday.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
On radio now, after the break, or in fact coming up very shortly, in fact, we're going to be discussing an important health story. Thousands of lives could theoretically be saved with the help of an immunotherapy drug that can cut the risk of an aggressive form of breast cancer, returning by more than a third. The results from a long-term meta-study are being described by those involved with it as exciting. Let's turn to NHS doctor, Dr. Raphael Alaya, who joins us now. Doctor, thanks ever so much for your time, as ever, really appreciate it. Where breast cancer treatments are concerned, it's by gradations, isn't it? We see new drugs introduced, trialled, pioneered, results vary, obviously. The direction of travel overall is broadly promising. What about this one?
It's a pleasure to be with you, Colin. This, as you said, is very promising news because it represents a wave of research which is going through the system and coming to fruition a lot quicker than what we've seen over the past few decades. And of course, cancer is one of the final frontiers when it comes to healthcare, and we're finally starting to see, the fruit of the research. And I think the last 2 years of what we've seen with COVID and the research there has helped that. But of course, cancer is a very different beast. It's very encouraging. In the USA, we've seen it be approved by the FDA, and they predict that more than tens of thousands of lives are going to be saved by that. And in Europe and in the UK, we're hoping to see proportionate lives saved as well. And this drug affects a number of different cancers as well. So hopefully there's going to be more uses than what we've even seen now. So very promising indeed.
This is pembrolizumab. I hope I probably do mispronounce the drug concerned here. Doctor, just on the point about COVID, I have read, maybe our viewers have come across this story as well, that one of the side effects, the negative side effects of COVID has been that those all-important trials where the humans are guinea pigs for these drugs, often when people have a terminal diagnosis, it's a last throw of the dice. And that's not been happening with the frequency it has in the past, just because people were labouring under COVID restrictions. They couldn't go to the hospitals. They couldn't participate in the trials.
Yeah, the COVID situation took over all the priorities when it came to other types of testing and research, for good reason. But indirect benefits and advantages of the COVID research that went on was that there's a different mentality when it comes to undertaking fast-paced research that comes to fruition a lot quicker. And we're seeing that in other types of research. The amount of time it takes for cutting-edge research to reach the clinical platform in hospitals can take 17 years. That's what research has shown. And I think recently that time has been cut down, hopefully to more than half. Because 17 years for research to reach the patient is far too long, especially for cancer, when there's so much technology and research going on now that's really exciting. So pros and cons of the COVID situation, of course.
As always. Dr. Elia, thanks very so much for joining us today. Do appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Mark White, our home editor, is coming to the studio. He's alongside Alice, who's reflecting on all the day's news today. Mark, there's a situation in the English Channel, not unusual that. Is it a rescue of migrants or something a bit more routine? What do you know?
Yeah, it was a rescue that happened just off the coast of Dunkirk. These are not uncommon, though, as these small boats try to get offshore. They're often pushed back by the waves there. There are shallow sandbanks which they can get grounded on. And what happens is either they're spotted by vessels that are passing and they contact the rescue services, or the migrants on board, if they feel it's too unsafe, then call the rescue services for help. And that seems to be what's happened here. We should say this is not footage of that particular incident. This is footage we captured just at the back end of last year, Colin.
Where are we on the numbers being released now, Mark, by the Home Office? There was a suggestion they wouldn't be releasing daily figures. I have to say, I haven't seen them this week. That may just be my own failings. What do you know?
I think it's more to do with the fact that the weather has been pretty horrific in the Channel, so there haven't been migrants trying to make that crossing in the Channel, so we've not been getting the numbers through on that. They haven't as yet gone through with this threat not to issue us with any more numbers. When that happens, I think there will be understandable outrage because people want to know what is happening in the English Channel in terms of this very significant number of people, and we know it was over 28,000 last year. We are, by all accounts, preparing for a number at least double that this year. So far this year, even though weather conditions have been pretty horrific for the first month or so of the year, we've still had about 1,500 migrants who've made that crossing, which for this time of year is pretty extraordinary.
I'm just hearing, Mark, as you're speaking in my ear, I'm hearing that those 36 migrants have been rescued according to the French Coast Guard. So this one's been resolved and dealt.
They've been taken to Dunkirk now by the rescue services.
Okay, you probably know more than Reuters do, who have just, I'm hearing from them. Alice Grant, as a Brexiteer and as a young Brexiteer, what do you say to those people who argue, and I'm sure you've been presented with this argument on several occasions, that actually we need to be more open with our borders?
Well, I mean, if you just look at the state of this country at the moment, already crippled under spiralling national debt, there's been probably an employment crisis for Britons coming up over the next few years. The toll that COVID restrictions have taken on our nation, the fact that the NHS, I mean, what have we heard for the last 2 years incessantly? The NHS is about to collapse because of the strain and the pressure on it. and our welfare system, which is all showing cracks. The point is, at this point, we are already, our welfare state simply can't take it.
We've got
That's it, really.
There's a side of this argument which regular viewers of my broadcast will be familiar with, to the point of not wanting me to say it anymore. But I think there's an X factor in this conversation that's always missing, which is that we are reluctant to embrace this idea of growing our own. And if you look at some countries now who are looking at their future demographics and they're petrified, and we've got stories today in the UK papers about a shortage of teachers. We're familiar with the idea of a shortage of nurses, truckers, care workers, the list goes on and on and on. And the X factor, as far as I'm concerned, is demography. Some countries are facing up to the fact that they need to help people in terms of the tax and benefits system to simply have children, because you can't rely on importing people forever.
Indeed, it's not a sustainable problem by any means. And of course, we've seen already the catastrophic effects of the EU freedom of movement.
I've got to ask the question, Alice.
Yes.
As a young woman, I mean, if you look at a country like Hungary, where they say if you have, say, 3-4 children, you'll never pay any income tax, would quite such blunt fiscal instruments affect your behaviour? I mean, seriously, would you change your plans when it comes to having children, depending on how much money the state was willing to provide?
Well, I definitely agree with Viktor Orban's measures that he's putting in place to increase the birth rate in Hungary. But I don't know, I think children is a bit of a way off for me yet, so I'm not really, I'm not sure. But I think I do
We weren't
agree.
prying, were we? We weren't prying. We were, just for the avoidance of any doubt, we were not prying. We'll say thank you to Mark White, holding it together very well there.
Just trying to.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
And Alice Grant, who will be with us throughout the course of the next hour. It is coming up to 5 o'clock. Stay with us. Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Coming up this live at 5. Why is a school in Nottinghamshire seemingly indoctrinating pupils with anti-government propaganda? Also, 40 years on from the Falklands War, why is China backing Argentina's claim to sovereignty over the islands? And as England aims to become the first country in the world to drop all COVID restrictions, we ask how we stop them being reimposed again. Alongside me throughout today's show, the political commentator Alice Grant. But first, the news headlines with Polly.
It's 5 o'clock. Your top stories on GB News. The Prime Minister says Poland and the UK won't accept a world in which a powerful country can bully or attack another. It comes amid continuing fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Speaking after meeting the Polish Prime Minister, Boris Johnson said Poland is critical to security in Eastern Europe, adding, when Poland is threatened, we're all threatened. Boris Johnson says that Russia must understand there will be bloodshed if there was an invasion.
I think everybody should be in no doubt that were Russia to be so foolish to make the catastrophic mistake of invading any part of Ukraine, the Ukrainian army, which themselves number about 200,000, maybe 150,000 in reserve, they will fight. We stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies in Poland, which we always do, but also to show that the West as a whole will strengthen NATO's eastern frontiers rather than the reverse.
Boris Johnson speaking in Poland. Well, the Foreign Secretary has challenged her Russian counterpart, who claims the Kremlin isn't threatening any country despite the build-up of its troops near Ukraine's border. Liz Truss said she can't see any other reason for having 100,000 troops stationed on the border. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, accused Britain of refusing to listen. Here, the Prime Minister says he won't quit if he's fined by police over alleged lockdown-breaking events at Number 10. Former Prime Minister Sir John Major has today accused Boris Johnson of breaking the law and making the government look distinctly shifty. Responding to the criticism, Boris Johnson said it was demonstrably untrue that controversies about parties in Downing Street had damaged the UK's reputation overseas. Sir John says Mr Johnson's brazen excuses were undermining public trust in government.
Our democracy is a fragile structure. It is not an impenetrable fortress. It can fall if no one challenges what is wrong or does not fight for what is right. The protection of democracy depends upon Parliament and the government upholding the values we have as individuals and the trust we inspire as a nation.
Sir John Major speaking early. Well, in Scotland, pupils and teachers in secondary schools will no longer need to wear face coverings in classrooms. That's from the end of this month. Masks will still be needed in communal areas and when moving around school buildings. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced the change earlier in the Scottish Parliament.
In arriving at its recommendation, the advisory subgroup pointed to reducing case rates for secondary-aged pupils, which is a recent development, falling hospitalisation rates across all age categories, and the fact that at this stage the estimated R rate is now below 1. In addition, of course, vaccination rates for young people continue to increase.
Nicola Sturgeon. Now, pig farmers have been protesting outside a meeting that they say is critical for the future of their industry. A roundtable discussions taking place at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs offices, DEFRA, in York over a crisis in British pig production. It comes after at least 35,000 healthy pigs had to be culled because of a shortage of butchers. The National Pig Association says more than 200,000 other pigs are being held on farms, even though they're ready for slaughter. Prince William's father, Prince Charles, has tested positive for COVID-19 for the second time. A palace source says the Prince of Wales met with the Queen recently, but the monarch is not showing any symptoms. Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall attended an event at the British Museum yesterday. The Welsh First Minister, Mark Drakeford, has also tested positive today. And the Duchess of Cornwall says she's very honoured and very touched to have been endorsed by Her Majesty the Queen as future Queen Consort. She spoke publicly about the announcement for the first time while opening a community kitchen in West London today. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now more from Colin Brazier.
Now, according to the results of a new poll, 75% of Brits believe self-isolation requirements should be in place for at least the next few months. Perhaps fairly unsurprising, but wait for this one. The same survey shows that half of Britons, and this was a survey of 4,500 people, by the way, half of them, 50%, want COVID restrictions in some form in place. This is related to self-isolation in place effectively in perpetuity. This is according to a YouGov survey. Why are we then seemingly so terrified of an increasingly mild variant? Is it proof perhaps that the government's nudge unit, which produced this kind of thing, which uses behavioural psychology to influence attitudes, went a little bit too far and has made us perhaps irrational in the face of some of the risks that are posed by Omicron in particular. The poster on screen, an example perhaps of that messaging. The Prime Minister has declared that all coronavirus rules, including self-isolation, are set to be ditched in England from the end of the month. Now that comes with a big proviso, the proviso being that the current data continues in the direction that it's going, which is very positive. Some unions, however, resisting a return to normal. The boss of Unison, for example, has warned that COVID risks have not disappeared and said the Prime Minister's plans are, quote, going too far, way too soon. We're joined by Laura Dodsworth, filmmaker and author of A State of Fear and Bare Reality. Laura, thanks for your time, do appreciate it. Should we start with this survey? I was surprised, to put it mildly, that half of those surveyed, and it wasn't a small sample, 4,500 people by YouGov, said that they want to see in place the self-isolation rules based on mass testing for the foreseeable future.
Well, with the proviso that sometimes you have to take polls with a little bit of a pinch of salt, no discredit intended to YouGov, it's obvious that some people aren't ready for this stage of the pandemic. We were always going to get to the end when restrictions would be lifted, and there would always be varying degrees of comfort around this point in time. The thing is that fear of infection, fear of a pandemic, fear of death, these are all completely natural things. You know, you referred to fear being irrational before, but these fears are hardwired into us. Something that I predicted in my book, A State of Fear, is that using fear to create compliance would put a brake on recovery, because fear is a highly emotional and destabilising tactic. And what I set out in the book, which I think a lot more people are coming around to now, is that fear was inflated deliberately in order to gain compliance with the lockdown, which was this entirely new set of very draconian rules. So, for instance, masks keep fear alive. The daily death stats that were presented without any context, we were told how many people died, but not how many people recovered. A constant wave of bad news stories in the media. And you just gave an example of an ad. Well, there was a huge advertising campaign which focused on democratising the risk, making people feel that they were all equally at risk when they weren't, inflating the sense of risk. Some ads actually had to be withdrawn because they weren't correct, such as saying 1 in 3 joggers and walkers in the park could be giving you coronavirus now. That was never true. Extremely punitive fines. And vaccine passports, of course, were a behavioural science tool, which has been acknowledged as well now. So all of these measures have created a stage now where some people don't feel ready for the rules to be relaxed, because their sense of fear is artificially inflated.
Laura, what do you say to those people who hear what you're saying but will point to the hard data, and in particular the number of fatalities? What are we, in excess of 150,000 and still rising by, thankfully in fairly modest terms in this country, but globally 5.5 million. And they will say, had it not been for some of that scaremongering, if that's what it was, the death toll could be higher because it did change behaviour in a way that was needed. That's their position.
Well, I think that there's a debate to be had about all of this, and I think that an incredibly crucial part of the inquiry has to be the behavioural science approach, and specifically the use of fear and shaming and social norms, which are quite egregious behavioural science tactics to use. I'd say this is so serious that deserves an inquiry of its own. I mean, I've never been a COVID denier. Clearly, people died, and we've just lived through a dangerous epidemic. But I'd say we've also lived through something of a propaganda event. I mean, if you look at all of those ads, what they do is they deflect the criticism onto the individual. Look him in the eyes and tell him you never broke the rules, as though any particular action you took could be responsible for the next stage. And I think we've seen that kind of attitude in the experts as well. Robert West, who's a professor of health psychology who sits on SAGE, actually said publicly at the end of December that it was a certainty that the UK would see a hospitalisation rate that exceeded the capacity of the NHS. Now, he was just doing his own best effort at a litmus test, but it shows the kind of fears that people have had all the way through, from the first VE day to the unwinding of Freedom Day in 21, to not imposing more restrictions in January, to letting go now. At each stage, people have worried about what will happen next. I think some of that is the illusion of control. Look, we had self-isolation, and yet 2/3 of the country, best estimates, have been infected with COVID. Yeah. So I think that the fears that, the stage right now is natural. You can see some of the, the government trying to wind back this fear. So presenting data with more context and saying things like the data's unreliable.
Laura, just on that point, I mean, I just wonder how easy it will be, particularly if you subscribe to the view that the Prime Minister's authority is being weakened by Partygate. How easy is it for any figure in the UK now to speak to the entire nation and say, guys, it's over, ditch the masks, ditch the passports, it's over?
Okay. Well, 2 things I'd say to that. First of all, at this stage, it should be clear to everybody that the policymakers who inflated everybody's sense of fear and those really terrifying and sinister advertising campaigns into the world were not so terrified themselves, and don't forget they had all the data at their fingertips, that they couldn't attend parties from the spring of 2020. So, the policymakers themselves were still travelling across London sea lovers, taking public transport, going to parties. So that tells you what the people in the corridors of power, where their fear levels were. Secondly, I do think that the moral authority of our leaders has been damaged. Personally, I think less from Partygate than from the policies that actually led to using fear, which is a very sinister form of control. I think that using fear has affected the moral and the technical legitimacy of the government more than the parties.
Laura, just one, in a word if you can, what's the one lever of power that government's going to really struggle to relinquish now?
Fear. Once you've used fear, there's nowhere left to go. And I think
that's
that,
it. That was great.
unfortunately, you
That
can
was- that
see
was-
a
that was pithy. That
a
was the
very
perfect
strong
soundbite.
behavioural science
Laura.
approach and lots of forthcoming policies.
OK, thanks, thanks ever so much. Laura Dodsworth. Alice Grant's alongside me here to reflect on some of that. And you know, the point about calling it, it's complicated by the fact that actually we've got a government at Westminster, the English Parliament, whatever we're going to call it, but within the devolved structure of the UK now, you've got Boris Johnson saying it's over, you've got Nicola Sturgeon saying, no, it ain't, but in classrooms at least the masks can go come the end of this month. We don't quite yet know what Wales will do or Northern Ireland. So you've got that complication. And there is, I think, genuinely, I mean, we saw the reaction to the first Freedom Day, and people, it seemed to me, and anecdotally, people said, OK, here we go. By Freedom Day 2, rather less so.
Well, I think, to be honest, I think most people, just because of common sense and rationality, kind of abandoned the COVID restrictions, especially after day one. I know that I, for one, have not adhered or complied with any of these restrictions, which I felt had no scientific basis.
From the beginning?
Well, from the beginning. I mean, I never supported lockdown, but for sure, when it comes to the restrictions, I was always very suspicious of the government. Indeed, as Laura said...
So you'd go on a train and not wear a mask, or what are we talking about?
Essentially, yeah. Well, yes, I went to the park during lockdown. Yeah, I tried my best to keep rationality, because I agree with Laura that they were using very sinister tactics, coercive tactics, scaring us.
But maybe Alice, maybe you were just lucky. Maybe your principal position never came into collision with the reality, for instance, of policing.
Well,
you weren't caught.
I mean, I suppose perhaps I was lucky in a sense. But if you did look at the scientific evidence for COVID, I knew that it would never affect me as a young person. So I did get ill with it, but I was obviously fine. It was just a bad flu. So I think that the hysteria over it has been exaggerated. And leaders like Nicola Sturgeon, I think at this point, are just using it to kind of mask their disastrous leadership, because at this point, there are just no reasons, especially why children should still be suffering from mask mandates and social distancing and not being able to enjoy their lives. And yeah.
Alice, thanks very much indeed for now. Let's start with a number. It's this one, 133. 133. That is how many cars are stolen in Britain every week. The number is rising by something like 3% a year, at least last year. We'll show you a list. This is the list of the country's most stolen cars. I'm sorry if this is intruding on private grief if you are one of those who's seen your car taken. On radio, let me take you through it if you are listening. Ford Fiesta is in first place. It's not really quite right to talk about it in first place. Land Rover, the Range Rover, comes up second with the absolute numbers stolen, edging above 3,700. Third, the Ford Focus. The fourth, the VW Golf. I've got one. I've still got it. Last time I looked. Fifth, the Mercedes-Benz C-Class. There you go. The BMW 3 Series. Land Rover Discovery, making a second appearance for Land Rover. Oops. The Corsa, the Vauxhall Corsa, in at 8. The Vauxhall Astra is 9th, with just over 1,000 of those vehicles stolen in the UK this year. And the posher Mercedes, the E-Class, in at number 10. Let's discuss this with the broadcaster and used car expert, Danny Kelly, who joins us now. Hi to you, Danny. The numbers are going up a little bit. Are these cars that are stolen to be exported? Are these cars that are stolen to be used by joyriders? What's going on, do you think?
The reason that the humble Ford Fiesta is at the top, Colin, is not because of its desirability to be exported to Nigeria or South Africa like a Range Rover below it at number 2. It's simply a numbers game. There are just hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Fiestas. It's purely numbers with the lower value cars. You mentioned, interestingly, and just round the corner, well, a short drive away, we build Land Rovers and Range Rovers here in the West Midlands. Now, that's a completely different type of vehicle theft, because that would be exported to South Africa, Nigeria. It could be stripped within 24 hours and the parts put on eBay. So this top 10 list, there are cars in the top 10 list that may be stolen. A 20-year-old car, someone's missed the last train home from Liverpool, so they go and nick a humble Ford Fiesta and drive down to the Midlands. That's, I suppose, feasible, and that's why the Fiesta's at the top. But the more expensive, the heavy metal, as we call it in the car game, Colin, they're stolen to order, generally speaking.
But when I was given a ride in a posh Land Rover recently, Danny, and I mean it's so high tech. It's got the lights know when there's a car coming up, so it dips the lights. I mean, there's fantastic computer technology there. How can it be, therefore, that they can't invent a key fob that stops them being cloned or whatever else is going on to make them stolen?
Sure, with wonderful technology that makes a car more appealing in the showroom, there is also technology out there that can defeat it. I know of a 2018 Range Rover Vogue, probably the best part of 40-odd grand, Colin, and it was stolen in Leafy, Warwick, about 10 days ago. And the thieves used what we call relays, and they're easily purchased online, Colin. And the remote key, which is a remote access key, meaning that you don't need to actually unlock or unlock the car or with a key or a blip. The car actually detects when you're close enough, and it recognises that you're the owner, or the key is synchronised with the car. There is technology out there for about 80 quid, £100, where all someone has to do is stand by your front door, hoping that you leave your keys maybe on the hall table, and it searches and interrogates a vicinity of, say, 6 feet, 9 feet. And when it detects a key code, it copies it and then it relays it to the car. And some other villain is standing by your car waiting for the car door to simply open. And once that computer technology was invented, the thieves soon latched onto it. So it's an incredibly convenient thing. You can go to your car, you don't need to search for your key, but it's also a big Achilles heel. And that's what happened to this lad's 2018 Range Rover. So my advice, Colin, would be, if you do have a keyless entry, which is what it's called, is do what I do. And I put my car keys in my fridge as soon as I walk into the kitchen, just put them in the fridge. I know, yeah, now I'm going to have my M5 nicked, and someone's going to come through the front door knowing where the keys are kept. Oh, that's another thing, Colin, actually, because if they can't clone the car, what they can do, and I heard of this a couple of weeks ago, an older couple, I don't want to say elderly couple, but an older couple woke up in the morning and their bedroom had been ransacked, and they didn't understand why. And they walked downstairs and there was a kettle. There was a kettle full of cold water, which was on the staircase. And they were thinking, what the hell's going on? It transpired that they were broken into in the dead of night, and they boil the kettle. The thieves boil the kettle, because if they get disturbed, they quite simply throw piping hot water over you as you're coming down the stairs to tackle them. Luckily, I know it's crazy, Colin. Luckily for them, they didn't wake up. They had their BMW M4 stolen. And of course, once you have that experience, Colin, you never go back to buying an M4. You go and buy, I think they replaced it with something far more modest, because they don't want to relive that situation.
No, amazing. And it's amazing when I walk down the street where I live, Danny, I'll see that the Range Rovers have all got the old-fashioned steering locks. It's back to the future, isn't it? You're back to the 1980s. Danny, we could go on, but we're running out of time. But really appreciate your thoughts, as ever. Thanks so much. Danny Kelly there, joining us with that top 10 list of the most stolen cars from the UK. It's gone up 3% this year. Coming up after the break, an expert statistician tells us why he thinks SAGE, the government's COVID advisors, got their Omicron projections so very wrong. But first, it's time for the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGiven from the Met Office. Showers ease overnight with clearing skies as well, and that will lead to a widespread frost up and down the country, with the exception of the east coast, and that's because of the low pressure that has brought some very windy weather to parts of Scotland through the day. That's going to transfer its winds and some showers to the east coast of England, southeast Scotland through the evening and overnight. Risk of gales in some exposed coastal locations, for example, the north coast of Norfolk. But away from there, clearing skies, 1 or 2 showers still affecting western parts, but otherwise under the clear skies with lighter winds away from the east coast, temperatures falling away. I think widely 0 to -3 first thing Friday, but for rural parts of Scotland, -5 to even as low as -10 Celsius is possible. However, despite the chill in the air first thing, plenty of sunshine about. Widespread sunny skies remain across central and eastern parts into the afternoon, whilst much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest turn increasingly cloudy. 1 or 2 showers here and there, but for the vast majority it stays dry, and temperatures 7 to 9 Celsius fairly widely. Into the evening, the thicker cloud towards the far northwest pushes some rain in and the winds pick up as well. So turning wet for Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, hill snow for a time for Scotland as well as the Pennines. And then the wet weather pushes into northwest England and West Wales by the end of the night. It turns more showery for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but with the wind picking up and the cloud increasing, most places are frost-free. The one exception, parts of East Anglia where temperatures will dip to around 0 first thing Saturday. Nevertheless, cloudy and increasingly breezy for the vast majority on Saturday itself. An area of persistent rain for southern Scotland, northwest England and much of Wales. Showers to the northwest of that, brighter skies to the south, and then widely wet and windy on Sunday.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV and on DAB radio. Given that lockdown was very nearly ordered on the advice of SAGE last month, it may be worth taking a look at the scenarios that it worked with, that it published, and how they compare to the situation as it actually unfolded. Well, the highest estimated deaths per day, I'm sorry to speak quite so bluntly about this, because if you're one of those people who lost somebody, it's more than a graph, isn't it? But the highest estimated deaths per day was at 4,770, with the, in quotes, best case scenario estimated at a lower figure, but still a massive one, 1,880 deaths per day. But what was the actual figure in reality? It came in at under 200 deaths per day. It raises several questions. One is, if we knew the real world data from South Africa had already shown that Omicron was milder, less likely to lead to fatalities, then how did our modelling prove, as it turned out, so profoundly pessimistic? Well, the the statistics expert, the statistician, Jamie Jenkins, joins me. Jamie, welcome to you, and thanks for your time. Appreciate it as ever, and your expertise. There will always be those people who say better to be pessimistic, surely.
Well, the thing is, Colin, they came up in September, stated actually, and they said, if remember now, I think Boris brought those Plan B restrictions, was the vaccine passes. He brought them in back in towards December, but they were calling back in September of last year, Sage, that if Boris didn't bring in those restrictions back then, we would see between 3,000 and 7,000 hospitalizations per day. And the reality there was only 700 was kind of the maximum. So when we went then into the Christmas period, I think Michael Gove was saying that he was pushing at Cabinet for further restrictions, looking at these models, and obviously Scotland and Wales did go ahead with further restrictions, and I think there was a bit of a kind of a disagreement at Cabinet, and then the people who want the side of, well, we think the numbers might be a bit out, they kind of won the argument. And as the graph is showing, that they do a range of different scenarios, and the one you just presented, Colin, is the one where they assumed that Omicron would be 50% kind of less severe than the Delta variant that we had before. They assumed around 6 million boosters would be issued per week, I think, by when we go into January. And to be frank, it didn't even stack up when they published it, Colin, because to get anywhere near, say, that higher estimate of 5,000 deaths per day, which Professor Neil Ferguson was talking about, I did some numbers and I wrote a blog on this just before Christmas. You need to get about 1.7 million cases a day, and we get absolutely nowhere near that. So I think, to be frank, the modelers themselves should be looking at the data, looking at their graphs, and the first thing you do is see, is this plausible? And I just don't think they were plausible, even with the scenarios they've come up with.
I remember the conversation just before Christmas that we had, Jamie, and at the time we talked to the South African doctor who was one of the first people on the ground to report what was being seen with Omicron, and she was saying then it's vastly transmissible, it's a lot less lethal. I just wonder, and it's a question I keep repeating, I'm almost beginning to bore myself with it, but I think it's an important one. How do you introduce, should you even begin to introduce, an element of moral hazard when it comes to modelling? We want our academics, the people who are projecting these things, looking at the data, to feel no political pressure to come up with the model they feel reflects what's likely to happen. However, if it proves to be the case that they are consistently being pessimistic, and that pessimism isn't just academic, it leads to deaths from cancer, mental health, all the other stuff we now know in such profusion, what should we do? We don't need to listen to them. Do we at least say to the ones who consistently get it wrong, thanks for your time, we'll try somebody else next time?
Well, I think we've got to go with the latter there, because as you can see, when you're so far out, if a lot of these people would be kind of sacked, I suppose, if you worked in a private company and you was predicting what kind of the projections for, say, you're working in a company and you want to work out how many sales are we going to have next year, and if you get that completely out, the company might go bankrupt. So you're right, this is people's lives that we're talking about. You have the range that they've got in that chart that you put up, and remember now, we were 93% lower actually than the central estimate, but significantly lower. They were talking potentially just under 2,000 deaths per day if you had the more optimistic scenario, and it's come in at lower than 200. Now, some people would say, Colin, that 200, and I've seen them now saying that Boris shouldn't be easing all the restrictions because 200 deaths per day is a lot, but you're right, we've got to consider everything else, all the other deaths that occur. And at the moment, Colin, I suppose the optimistic thing is that if you look at the number of deaths that the ONS are reporting every single week at the moment, they're no higher than what you'd expect in a normal kind of winter. They're actually lower than 2018, 2017 and 2015. Now, part of that might be because we had a lot of excess deaths through the pandemic, but the figures themselves, when you start looking at on a whole, I think it's more optimistic in terms of easing the restrictions, and I think probably the Prime Minister's headed in the right direction on that.
That's interesting. Jamie Jenkins, as ever, thanks very much indeed for your time. Alice Grant's alongside me here in the studio. Do you pore over the data? Do you look at statistics and graphs and try and make an informed judgment, or do you let the politicians do it for you?
I think it's extremely important that we all look at the data, the true data, not just the hysteria propagated by the media and by the government. I remember at the start of the pandemic already feeling very suspicious of the fact that the government was employing notorious Ferguson from Imperial College, and his modelling, considering his track record, is abysmal. And so from the beginning, I think, obviously, I was very suspicious.
Alice, do you feel, we've got you here as a political commentator, but you're somebody who's, as a younger person who's lived through COVID, do you feel that part of your teen years, your late teen years, have been stolen from you?
Absolutely, and actually I think it gets worse the younger you go. My younger sister basically missed out on the whole of her sixth form experience. I got, I think, about a year and a bit, but it was still very much, it definitely took a toll on me having to just, I could never imagine that school would close down. And when they did, I mean, I suddenly found myself with, sitting at home. My whole life had been turned upside down, and I think many people felt that way.
And the oldies like me who will then turn to you and say, well, I'm sorry, that was just a price you had to pay to stop the body bags increase.
I know, the amount of times, I mean, the youth have had it so bad because we've been made to feel as though it was our fault if anything happened to grandma, but actually, obviously we've been affected in so many ways because of this pandemic, and I just can't think about the young children who have been masked because I thankfully was never in school when the masks were fully enforced. But I've seen how atrocious the results have been of that.
Well, let's hope we can ditch those masks in classrooms. As Nicola Sturgeon's indicated today, by the end of the month in Scotland, the classrooms, if not the entire schools, as soon as possible, as is happening in England. You're with me, Colin Brazier, on GB News, on TV and on radio. Next up is John Major, the right man to lecture Boris on standards in public life. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Very good evening. The latest news headlines. The Prime Minister says Poland and the UK won't accept a world in which a powerful country can bully or attack its neighbours. It comes amid continuing fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Speaking after meeting with the Polish Prime Minister and President, Boris Johnson said the country's absolutely critical to security in the region. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary has challenged her Russian counterpart who claims the Kremlin isn't threatening any country despite its build-up of troops near Ukraine's border. Liz Truss said she can't see any other reason for having 100,000 troops stationed on the border. But the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accused Britain of refusing to listen. The Prime Minister says he won't quit if he's fined by police over alleged lockdown-breaking events at Number 10. The former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, has today accused Boris Johnson of breaking the law and making brazen excuses. Responding to the criticism, Mr Johnson says it was demonstrably untrue that controversies about parties in Downing Street had damaged the UK's reputation overseas. From the end of the month, pupils and teachers in secondary schools in Scotland will no longer need to wear face coverings in classrooms. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, announced the change in the Scottish Parliament earlier on today. Meanwhile, a palace source says the Prince of Wales, who's tested positive for COVID for the second time, met with Her Majesty the Queen on Tuesday, but Buckingham Palace says the monarch is not showing any symptoms. Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall attended an event at the British Museum. The Welsh First Minister, Mark Drakeford, has also tested positive today. And the Duchess of Cornwall has said she's very honoured and very touched to have been endorsed by the Queen as future Queen Consort. She spoke publicly about the announcement for the first time while opening a community kitchen in West London. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. We'll have more Brazier after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up to 20 to 6 or thereabouts, you with Brazier. Now, the former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, said today he could no longer hold it in any longer. He had to take Boris Johnson to task for what he described as law-breaking at number 10 over parties during the course of lockdown. Let's turn to the columnist and commentator, Andre Walker. Andre, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. I'm just going to read you a quote from part of what Sir John Major had to say today. Brazen excuses were dreamed up, he said. Day after day, the public was asked to believe the unbelievable. Ministers were sent out to defend the indefensible, making themselves look gullible or foolish. Some people will listen to that and say, well, he's right, isn't he?
Well, let me just give you an obscure thing. Believe the unbelievable. This is a man who, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, stood up in Parliament multiple times and said that Britain was not shadowing the Deutschmark and they were not going to join the ERM as part of a demand that he wanted to join the single currency. The fact of the matter is that it was obvious that they were doing that. This guy has got no credibility with any of this. Let me tell you something, Colin. I don't agree with Boris Johnson having done what he did. I don't think it's appropriate to pass a law and then completely ignore that law. Now, whether it's the spirit or the reality. But for John Major, somebody who caused so many problems with Brexit because he was so dishonest to the public, overshadowing the Deutschmark, over joining the ERM, over destroying the British economy, breaking the Bank of England, all of these things, Maastricht, this guy's got absolutely nothing to tell us about honesty or dishonesty in politics. And I will say this, I don't like people drinking champagne and eating brie when I'm not able to go to my mother's deathbed. But I'll tell you something, I'd take that over a guy who deliberately hoodwinked the British public into destroying the economy because he was an obsessive pro-European behind everyone's back.
And is that obsessive Europhilia, Andre, if we can call it that, is that, do you think, what really is behind this intervention? Is it not so much about me, Sir John Major, trying to speak on behalf of the Conservative Party speakers, almost their conscience, and hasten MPs towards the 1922 committee, but it's more Sir John Major, the committed Europhile, who actually wants to undermine Boris Johnson, in so doing undermine the entire Brexit prospectus?
And do you know something? I'm not even going to answer that question. I'm just going to say to you, what a sad fact, because you know the answer. The answer is these people have got no interest in British governance. They've got no interest in standing up for the public. They are so obsessed with this European project. When does John Major ever intervene? Hey, by the way, the reason that John Major doesn't take a peerage is because these people are making out like bandits working for private sector companies. Tony Blair, David Cameron, John Major, all of them are on 5, 10, 20 million pounds a year. They only intervene when it comes to the European Union, and it's just very telling. Now, look, I was invited on this show to talk about potentially whether former prime ministers should have the right to say something. Look, I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't know whether there's a principle or a practice here. In principle, I think that anybody has a right to make a statement. In practice, John Major talking about lying to the public, John Major talking about Britain's economic future, John Major talking about the Conservative Party's electoral success. This man took the Conservative Party to its knees. Let's remember, on Black Wednesday, 30% interest rates, the Conservative Party dropped to 26% in the polls. They were obliterated in 1997. The reason people like John Major is they think he's a well-meaning idiot. But that's not a great thing. Do you know what Margaret Thatcher once said about him? She said, the problem with John Major is we never realised he was thick. If we'd have known he was thick, we wouldn't have had the problems. And I'll tell you what she meant. She, when she met John Major, heard him saying all sorts of outfield ideas, dissenting from lots of people. She thought it was because he was an alternative thinker. The reality is the guy was an idiot. He was one of the worst prime ministers in the history of this country. He took the Conservative Party to its knees. He allowed Tony Blair in, who I think destroyed civic society. And now he's coming along telling Boris Johnson about a party. Colin, I will tell you, you want to sack Boris Johnson for having a party. You want to sack Boris Johnson for drinking champagne, do it. But John Major has got nothing to tell you about honesty.
And that leads me to cue in a front... No, I'm not going to do it, actually. I'll leave it on Twitter. I'm not going to introduce it to the TV channel. But if you want to see a famous News of the World page, it's available on my Twitter account, if you're so moved. Andre, I'm going to pick up a little bit. I'm going to defend John Major. I mean, I think it's quite a charge to call him thick. I remember reading, so here's two biographies, John Major's autobiography, which actually did very well commercially, and unsurprisingly, it was very, very well written. And we were talking earlier, actually, about going to university or not. He didn't. He didn't go to university, John Major. And throughout his life, he was up against all those people that used to be stalk the corridors of Whitehall, had been to the right schools, and it wasn't a question of whether they went to university, it was whether it was Cambridge or Oxford. And he broke that mould to some degree, and, you know, patently a clever man. I think we can park that. Then there's the other question, I think, which is more interesting, which is to what extent former Prime Ministers get to have a say that people really listen to. And by the way, people really listened to what John Major had to say. Other news channels gave it the full live billing. It was all over, you know, his words verbatim on various news websites. Now, is he another of those Prime Ministers, like former Prime Ministers like Edward Heath, who just have got into a massive sulk, and they were defined by their sulkiness over decades? There's lots not to like about Theresa May, but I like the fact she carried on being a constituency MP, and I take her much more seriously when she inveighs against this government because she does so as a backbencher, not as a sulky former Prime Minister.
Well, let me tell you something. I used to work for the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. I'm very keen for Theresa May to continue as Member of Parliament for Maidenhead. I think there's a great deal of honour and dignity associated with continuing in your parliamentary roles. We've had some Prime Ministers recently, when I say some, I mean David Cameron, who used being Prime Minister as a stepping stone for a bigger job, which to most people, most ordinary people will seem crazy. Look, I said to you at the outset of this interview, I don't know whether it's principle or practice. I will say that if I saw Sir Winston Churchill talk about international relations, I'd probably think he had the right to speak as a former Prime Minister. I just think that it's egregious when you are talking about a subject that in reality you've got skin in the game, in reality you've got bad form on, in reality you are somebody who can't be trusted. You know, John Major hates Boris Johnson because he loves the European Union. I agree with you, Colin, about the way that John Major rose through the ranks, a great councillor in Lambeth and quite a nice bloke. But at the end of the day, Margaret Thatcher was taken down because of the Europhilia of some leaders of the Conservative Party. And the reality is they lied to Conservative Party members. And John Major stood up as Chancellor of the Exchequer and he said, we are not shadowing the Deutschmark, even though people could see that was happening. We are not going to join the ERM, which they then joined. And then he said all of that in order to make Conservative MPs seem like tinfoil-hatted nutters when they said the result of joining the ERM will be huge economic damage to this country and virtually breaking the Bank of England. And all that stuff came true.
Andre Walker, always really good to talk to you, really thought-provoking, and I always leave with a little bit of chair envy as well. Lovely high back chair. Andre, thanks a lot. Alice Grant's alongside me. So John Major, way before your time, really.
Well, I mean, what I know him from was his very loud opinions against Brexit. And he's standing on a podium talking about the fragility of democracy when he himself was one of the largest proponents of trying to overturn the historic democratic vote of 2016 in which the British people voted for Brexit. So in my mind, I think that, you know, as Andre was saying, his list of hypocritical points have been allowed. So
Yeah, OK, we'll come back to that maybe. Here's another question. Ask a good teacher why they love their job. And one reason often given is that that sense that they have a wonderful opportunity to shape impressionable young minds. But with that right, of course, comes an important responsibility, not to prejudice those young minds with what sometimes can feel almost like propaganda. This week we heard about a primary school in Nottinghamshire where 10-year-olds were effectively being indoctrinated with highly politicised propaganda. I don't think that's even needs putting in quotation marks. One pupil was pictured scowling at a whiteboard with the words lies, selfish and mistrust written above the name of our Prime Minister Boris Johnson. You may feel that's apt, but should it be taught in a classroom full of 10-year-olds? The sociologist Frank Furedi wrote a strongly argued column about this in the Daily Mail today, and he joins me now. Frank Furedi, welcome to you. Just reprise, Frank, your column in the Mail today, if you would, for us now.
Well, I think what it's about was discovering that 10-year-old children were being targeted by indoctrination. 10-year-old children who are not yet in a position to critically evaluate the different political ideals that are being focused on them. And what really concerned me was that here you had a bunch of teachers, primary school teachers, recycling their political agenda through children by getting them to write a letter to Boris Johnson and getting them to write a letter that's very critical of him. And when you look at the letters, it becomes very clear that these kids were being scripted to, in a sense, express the hostility and the criticism that the teachers had towards the Prime Minister. And then to make matters worse, the headmistress of this school was found out to put out a tweet that basically used the term Tory scum. Now, every teacher is entitled to their political opinion, but when you have the headmistress of a primary school who personifies, or ought to personify, the whole community, denouncing the Tory party as a bunch of scum, then what you have is a very intense kind of partisanship that you used to have in kind of Maoist or Stalinist kind of regimes. Now, I think what's very interesting is that after the article was published in the Mail today, I got emails from a bunch of people, 3 parents, who all made the same point. They said their child was always subjected to the same kind of propaganda. And they too were asked to write letters to Boris Johnson, criticizing him, calling him a liar, attacking the Prime Minister in a language that is just really outrageous when you think about 10-year-old children being the authors of this.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Frank, I just wonder, over the years, and in recent years, it seems to have accelerated. I've noticed, sitting here in news studios like this, so many academics come through my TV set into our viewers' homes, academics who express partisan opinions which have really surprised me. And I'm left scratching my head when I've heard them sometimes, and I'm thinking, do you not care for that sense of punctiliousness that you ought to be floating above this fray without getting involved? And then I come back to an argument about whether they are publicly funded. And there's an argument about whether, say, if you're a lecturer at a university, you're not really publicly funded. You certainly are if you're teaching in primary school, for heaven's sake.
Yes, I think that it's legitimate, for example, for a teacher to raise political questions with 15, 16-year-old kids who are becoming intellectually independent. And of course, when you get to university, it's entirely legitimate for academics to express their views, as long as they express them in such a way that they also sort of expose young students to the alternative points of view. So, for example, when I teach in a university lecture hall, I often give my opinion, whilst at the same time give just as much space, just as much time to views that are very different from mine, or even the very opposite to mine. In that way, what you do is you create an atmosphere where different points of views can be considered. And I think what's really worrying at the moment is that the distinction between political activism and teaching has become eroded, where very often political activists imagine that if they have the freedom to indoctrinate children with your views, and they call that teaching, whereas in fact that's not teaching, that's essentially a form of indoctrination that doesn't help anybody.
No, I absolutely agree, and I'm sure many of our viewers do. Frank Furedi, so good of you to join us today. Thanks ever so much. Just time for a story about, again, I suppose, the Chinese Communist Party, what it's up to. China has said Argentina should have sovereignty over the Falklands. It comes as the island's British territory in the South Atlantic prepares to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War. Then a British task force thwarted an Argentine invasion. 255 British servicemen and more than 600 Argentinians perished in that conflict, which saw that invasion overturned by a task force from the UK. The Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, responded to the Chinese statement by reaffirming that China was that the Falklands were very much part of the British territorial family. Joining me now, the former head of counter-terrorism at the MOD, Major General Chip Chapman. General Chapman, thanks for your time as ever. The Chinese seem to be getting a bit more involved than they have been with the Falklands. What are they up to?
Well, I think firstly you can take the long-term view, and that is the long-term view of China is to try and impose humiliations on those who historically wronged it. And Britain as an imperial power who partook in the Opium Wars in the 1840s, which led to reparations and the seizure of territories such as Hong Kong, is one of those that China sees that we wronged. So that's their long-term view. So this is kind of payback. The second thing they're doing is really trying to get Argentina into the Belt and Road Initiative. And indeed, they've been courting them for some time, as they have most of the countries in South America. And now they've kind of signed up. So there's a $23.7 billion loan to the Argentinians, which sort of allows China to have an in. So in terms of how we look at power, both diplomatically and in terms of information, military and economic, they're doing the diplomatic and economic. And the cultural and diplomatic thing of courting the Argentinians, the soft power that they've used, is now enabling them to use the economic power to bind Argentina to them.
I thought it was interesting when Liz Truss was asked about this at a press conference by a Chinese journalist, but working for the, in quotes, sort of state newspaper. And the journalist said, well, look, if you're prepared to send your aircraft carriers into the Pacific and into our neighbourhood, well, maybe we'll start sending some of our warships into the South Atlantic. It was a pretty clear message there, I thought.
Well, you can send your carriers anywhere you want, as long as it's not in the territorial waters of another state. So they could do that. What's intriguing from the Chinese perspective is that they do look at the Falklands campaign as a sort of how-to in terms of what they might do for Taiwan in the future. Now, Argentina, for example, has relations with Taiwan, particularly trade relations. It doesn't recognize it. And while China has the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative with China, they won't recognize Taiwan in the future.
Chip Chapman, as always, appreciate your time. Thanks very much. Alice Grant alongside me here. Alice, we've got about 45 seconds left. I mean, the Falklands War for you are frankly ancient history. Do they raise questions, however, about the extent to which people many, many thousands of miles away deserve the military support of a country they look to in terms of sovereignty?
Of course, and this is just the communist Chinese empire, which is imperialist and expansionist in action, really. What I can see here is that obviously, from a geopolitical perspective, Argentina is a very strategic country for China. They can have a foothold into South America, and of course, they are showing their true colours. They are bullying they're bullying Britain, and they are demanding the Falklands, which is obviously rightly ours. And I hope we can stand up to this. OK. Alice, appreciate you coming today. Really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. Much more news is coming up. Michelle Dewberry is next.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGiven from the Met Office. Showers ease overnight with clearing skies as well, and that will lead to a widespread frost up and down the country, with the exception of the east coast, and that's because of the low pressure that has brought some very windy weather to parts of Scotland through the day. That's going to transfer its winds and some showers to the east coast of England, southeast Scotland through the evening and overnight. Risk of gales in some exposed coastal locations, for example, the north coast of Norfolk. But away from there, clearing skies, 1 or 2 showers still affecting western parts, but otherwise under the clear skies with lighter winds away from the east coast, temperatures falling away. I think widely 0 to -3 first thing Friday, but for rural parts of Scotland, -5 to even as low as -10 Celsius is possible. However, despite the chill in the air first thing, plenty of sunshine about. Widespread sunny skies remain across central and eastern parts into the afternoon, whilst much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest turn increasingly cloudy. 1 or 2 showers here and there, but for the vast majority it stays dry, and temperatures 7 to 9 Celsius fairly widely. Into the evening, the thicker cloud towards the far northwest pushes some rain in and the winds pick up as well. So turning wet for Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, hill snow for a time for Scotland as well as the Pennines. And then the wet weather pushes into northwest England and West Wales by the end of the night. It turns more showery for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but with the wind picking up and the cloud increasing, most places are frost-free. The one exception, parts of East Anglia where temperatures will dip to around 0 first thing Saturday. Nevertheless, cloudy and increasingly breezy for the vast majority on Saturday itself. An area of persistent rain for southern Scotland, northwest England and much of Wales. Showers to the northwest of that, brighter skies to the south, and then widely wet and windy on Sunday.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News.